The penultimate episode of Presumed Innocent is here, and following Raymond collapsing to the floor in the previous episode, this one focused on Rusty Sabich having to represent himself and the tides turning on multiple different occasions. There weren't actually that many revelations in this episode when it came to finding out who could be the murderer, but this was definitely a tense one where we saw Rusty start by looking innocent, to it then transforming and it seeming like he could be the killer. With an ending that saw the murder weapon being placed at Tommy's, let's jump into the video and break down all that there was to take away from the episode. Here is Presumed Innocent, Episode 7, Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. Who trashed Tommy's house? The very last thing that we saw in the episode was Tommy returning home and his place had been trashed. As well as that, we also saw that the fire poker, the weapon that was used to kill Carolyn Polhemus, was on his table with a note that essentially told him to go and F himself. There are a few different people that could be behind this. The immediate one that you think of is that it could be Rusty, but I don't think that's the case at all. His life is on the line, as he said multiple different times, and other than when he snaps, he doesn't act on impulse. Everything that he does is well thought out, and he thinks about how it could impact the trial that's at play. So I don't think it's going to have anything to do with him. Nor do I think it would be Raymond. It could be Maya though, as she was pushed to the side and wasn't actually there on the morning of the trial when everybody else had arrived. She was the last person there, so what if she did it during the morning of the trial? You'd think she'd have more intelligence than to do something like that though, but you never know. I don't think this makes Maya a suspect though. We don't actually know if Tommy had this fire poker all along, but the fact that he didn't seem that shocked by it made it seem like he could have potentially had it all this time, which would add to the reasoning for him being a suspect even more. I think, however, the fact that Tommy's house was broken into and trashed seemed like it could be something that was done due to emotions running high and a lack of thinking behind the actions. This is what makes me think that it could well have been Jayden, Kyle, Carolyn's ex-husband, or Michael. Jayden and Kyle could have done it because they were constantly fearful for their father in this episode, which would also tie back to certain things that have been said by them. For example, when Jayden said about how your mind can make you forget traumatic things and you can act without thinking. What if she was involved in the murder in some way over wanting to protect her mother? And also, Kyle has been known to cycle and sneak around, such as when he was caught watching his father as well on the night that he went to visit Carolyn. Plus, he also threw out his bicycle, which was suspicious. They may not know the impact that it could have caused on the jury's view of their father, especially if Tommy calls in the fact that he's got the fire poker. So the emotions that were running high could have just caused them to act, because to them, Tommy is the enemy. As well as that, Carolyn's ex-husband and her son could have done it due to the fact that Tommy allowed Rusty to go all in on Michael with the questioning, and in turn made it seem like his father was a psychopath. So that could be his way of telling Tommy that he doesn't like him. Regardless, it doesn't seem like Tommy even knows himself who did it, but the fact that there was a window ever so slightly open, it does make me think that it could have been a kid that did it. The trial. The trial in this episode was the best that we've had in the show so far. As was represented by the shots of the city, the tides were turning, the case was being flipped, and the perception of the jury was changing. With Raymond surviving his health problems, we saw that Rusty wanted to represent himself, and it was probably the best time for him to do so because the jury saw him saving Raymond's life and they were viewing him as a good person. Michael was made to be a suspect due to the messages that he sent to his mother, saying things such as it would be better off if you were dead and how she's ruining his life. Every time Michael would say to Rusty that he felt that he was the person who killed his mother, the restraint that Rusty had was something that you could tell that he was controlling within himself, simply trying not to snap. He wanted to make it seem like Michael and his father could have been involved in some way, and he was successful in doing so. Rusty was given the opportunity to go for a mistrial over what happened with Raymond, but he didn't want to do that at all, and even after he questioned Rigo and expressed his innocence, Tommy called Rusty to the stand, something which ended up causing Rusty's unraveling. This scene, the final 10 minutes, was just pure perfection. We saw Tommy take the bolo tie from the wall where he had his first winning case, and that was the very thing which gave him the energy, the focus, and the mindset in order to step up and feel as though he could put Rusty in a corner. Tommy brought up the text messages that we were always wondering about, which made Rusty look like an obsessed individual. He also brought Mr. Ratzer to the trial, which was accompanied by the video of Rusty beating him up. Plus, he also brought up the time that the medical expert was attacked by Rusty. This was all done to show that Rusty had the capability of just simply snapping within him, something which could be connected to the fact that he could have snapped in a brief moment and killed Carolyn. Rusty said how he was passionate, in love with Carolyn, and not obsessed, and how it essentially made him lose sight of what was important to him, something which was believable for the jury until Tommy brought out his secret weapons. The score that was in this scene was just simply phenomenal, and it complemented it so well. There was a low drone in the background which was almost done to symbolize the punches that were being thrown towards Rusty and the evidence that Tommy was putting forward. Plus, whenever Tommy said the word snapped and would snap his fingers, the music would stop. And it really reinforced the importance of why Tommy had taken that approach in making it seem like Rusty had a violent side within him. Rusty definitely left the trial on the back foot, and not only Tommy, but Nico was pleased with how he performed, showing that he stepped up on the biggest moment in his career. This trial felt personal for Tommy. It was him versus Rusty, the person he'd been jealous of the entire time that he knew him. And in this instance, this was Tommy trying to sink Rusty into the ground and getting one up on him, because he'd never been able to do that before, whether it be professionally or personally, as he also liked Carolyn. The suspects. In the next episode, we're going to be seeing the jury's verdict and hopefully finding out who was actually behind the murder. I mentioned earlier about Jayden, Kyle, Michael and his father being suspects, but there are also a couple of other people that I think it could be. A lot of signs, especially in the previous episode, were pointing towards it being Tommy Molto. The fact that he was clearly in love with Carolyn, he made her feel uncomfortable and was probably the person who she filed an HR complaint about because she was scared of him. And as well as that, there was a flashback where we saw that he tried to kiss her and she denied him. Whilst it seems like it's very much pointing towards him, I would be surprised if it was, just purely because he's the most obvious suspect right now, so I am a little bit skeptical about it. Before I suspected Tommy Molto, I felt like it could have quite easily been Barbara. We know that she had access to the Bunny Davis files, as Rusty would have had them in his office, and we previously saw her looking in his office at the case of Carolyn. She could have found out that Rusty and Carolyn were still together, and in a moment of rage ended up going round there and getting revenge. There were also moments in episode 3 where when she was told to step back from her job, it was mentioned that she hadn't been well, so there was something that had clearly been impacting Barbara for a long while. Maybe it was the paranoia around Rusty and Carolyn being together. There were a few shots in this episode where there was almost a sense of guilt that was in her eyes. Guilt over the fact that Rusty was suffering and things were all going wrong for him, and it could all be her fault because she could be the murderer. When she was sitting in the car and the cameras were around her, it felt like it was implying that it was all getting too much for her, but I think there's a deeper meaning to it. Maybe that's why she couldn't go through with completely cheating on Rusty as well, because she already got the revenge that she desired in killing Carolyn. We're going to be finding out next week who it could be, and it's something that I'm looking forward to being revealed. If it turns out to be Barbara, I'll be satisfied. And also, if it does turn out to be Rusty, I'll be satisfied too, as long as we get a plausible explanation. My review of the episode. I thought this was the best episode in the season so far. I thought the final 10 minutes was just incredible to watch. Seeing Rusty going from looking innocent to guilty in the space of a few minutes really did flip it and showed us that even one episode away from the conclusion, we still don't know who's to blame. The close-up shots on Rusty's face as he was being questioned, almost representing the fact that he was getting more and more boxed in and there was now nowhere for him to run and escape to, was simply incredible. And it also gave a sense of claustrophobia and panic. The score was also exceptional throughout this moment too. The music in this show really reminds me of what gets used in Succession, and I think it works really well. When Raymond appeared towards the end of the episode and was there alongside Rusty, and also when Maya was there as well, the solidarity was something which was really inspiring, and it made me feel pleased for Rusty. The acting in this show as well is just top tier stuff. I buy into every character, and I believe who they are and what their motives are as well. Jake Gyllenhaal has delivered an outstanding performance throughout every episode. I would have liked to have maybe seen some kind of revelation in this episode that maybe hinted towards a certain somebody being the suspect in the finale, but I guess we're going in blind and just as confused as what we've been throughout the entirety of the season, which I'm also okay with. With only one episode to go, get your predictions in the comments and we'll see if anybody ends up being correct. So, there you have it, Presumed Innocent Episode 7 Ending Explained.